Peter.
Going. Good afternoon. Welcome to the January 23rd, 2018 regular board meeting at Everett Public Schools Board of Directors. Before we begin tonight, I'd like to take a moment of silence. Today we learned of another tragic shooting at a high school in Kentucky. Many students were injured and 2 students were killed at Marshall County High School in Benton, Kentucky. The suspect, a fellow student, was taken into custody. Our thoughts are with the students, families, and schools in that community impacted by these senseless, violent acts. Let us take this time to remember those who were killed or injured. Let us also think of the schools in that community who are also grieving with children, parents, and staff. We grieve with you. Thank you. And would you now please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Secretary, please call the roll.
President Mason.
Present.
Vice President Andrews. Director Lassane.
Present.
Director Mitchell. Director Wenta.
Present.
Student Representative Parikh.
Present.
Student Representative Pollock.
Thank you. Our first item of business tonight is the adoption of the agenda. Dr. Coe, would you please introduce tonight's agenda?
Yes, consistent with the plans established at your 2017 Summer Planning Workshop, tonight's agenda contains several elements related to both the district's strategic plan and the board's annual goals. There's a segment this evening for routine business, a segment for board comments, there's a segment for the superintendent's report, a segment for strategic progress reporting, and one for upcoming agenda items. As you noted, tonight's meeting is relatively abbreviated. There have been no changes to the agenda since it was published, although I'd note that the superintendent's report could be updated during the meeting as is customary for regular meetings. The board, of course, may elect to change the order of business by a majority vote of the members. This is not, however, the point in your agenda to request items to be removed from the consent agenda. We ask your approval, therefore, of the agenda as presented to you.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved by Director Lassane and seconded by Director Wenta to adopt the agenda. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The motion carries. And the agenda is adopted. Which takes us to Section 5.0 recognition, and we have no recognition for this evening. So we will move to 6.0 public comment. Dr. Cohn, do we have any public comment this evening?
We do not.
Okay. And that would take us to the consent agenda. 7.0. Dr. Cohn, would you please introduce tonight's consent agenda?
The board's consent agenda includes repetitive business items. These include, for example, meeting minutes, personnel actions, expense vouchers, and recurring contracts. Sometimes the consent agenda will include items that occur less frequently but are of a routine business nature. The less frequently occurring consent agenda items are usually reviewed by the board in its Friday report 1 week or more before the board meeting when those items are scheduled to appear on the consent agenda. This gives directors time to ask staff questions about those items or to consider a discussion about the policy implications of items. If a consent agenda item is removed by the concurrence of 2 directors, that item is placed in new business, and the system automatically renumbers the remaining items. The board votes on the consent agenda in a single motion. Consent agendas, by their definition, are not debatable. In the case of this consent agenda, the superintendent's office has received no questions or comments regarding these items. Therefore, the consent agenda is presented as published for board approval, which we ask thereof.
Thank you. A motion to adopt the consent agenda is in order.
So moved.
Second?
It has been moved by Director Wenta and seconded by Director Lesane to approve the consent agenda. Does any director wish to move an item from the consent agenda and place it in new business section of the agenda? Hearing no requests, we will proceed to the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The motion carries. Takes us to section 8.0, board comments. And I think I'm going to start at this end tonight. This is a time for student representatives and directors to share any business or any activities they've had as it relates to district information and activities. Student Representative Parikh, do you have anything to share tonight?
Yeah, sure. So this week is finals week for us
Oh,
at
yes.
Jackson, which is
For everyone, actually.
oh, for everyone, yeah, and which is that's stressful as always. But come Sunday, we have the legislative conference, which doesn't really help with the stress, but it does give me something to look forward to as the end of the week nears.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Director Wenta.
I had the opportunity to attend the Hawthorne Elementary Saucer, and just truly inspiring what Celia and our team does over there. I will be attending the Whittier Saucer on Thursday, and so looking forward to that. But so far, the saucers have been very, very helpful. Going through yet another year, it really deepens my understanding. So thank you.
Director Lesane.
Yes, I also had the opportunity to attend a saucer too at Cedarwood, and I must say I was really enlightened by that, and I was I left there very, very happy with the way in which we're working on improvement plans for our schools and the work that we're doing. I was just amazed. I also read in the Friday report that there was a syllabus workshop, AP syllabus workshop, back in November, and I think it was January of this year, not last year. I'm assuming that it was this year, in which 32 teachers, AP teachers, got together to work on a common course syllabi for their course-alike classes. And I'm very happy that we're doing that. I think it's a step in the right direction, ensuring that no matter where our kids go in the district, whether it's at Everett High School, Jackson High School, or Cascade High School, they're getting the same experience essentially with the foundational-based education, and I think that's wonderful. And I'm also delighted with the fact that they are also working on strategies and support that it's necessary for struggling kids to complete those AP classes, because I think when you provide the I guess you would say individualistic, if that's a word, individualistic support necessary to ensure our kids get through those courses and get the right education. It benefits them, and also shows that we are putting our money where our mouth is when we say we go down to what needs are for each student, and I think that's a great thing. Also, I didn't hear the results from our robotics work competition that was held this past weekend, but I do want to congratulate the 6 schools that went, because it just shows the added support that we're doing with STEM and science and getting our kids ready for the 21st century, 22nd century, and when that time when 2063, when warp drive will be discovered by Efren Cochrane, per the Star Trek trilogies. So I'm looking forward to that, and when our kids are ready for that. 2063 is just right around the corner. That's all I have to add.
Thank you. Well, it's been busy. I had the opportunity to attend the North PTA meeting and the Everett High School PTA meeting and the View Ridge Elementary School PTA meeting. And I always enjoy the opportunity to get out and converse with the parents and hear how things, you really get a sense of a school culture with the PTA meetings. But then also, I had a couple late parent conversations at View Ridge Elementary and then Everett High School as well. So again, had an opportunity to talk with parents there. And then in support of providing information for the upcoming bond and levy, had an opportunity to meet with the Cascade Parent Group, which was my first time. That was kind of fun to be in that school. And attend the Rotary Club of Everett luncheon. Director Wenta and myself got to present there today. And then the Mill Creek Business Association luncheon as well last week. And a couple individual meetings with parents throughout the district, just trying to answer questions and inform. And then lastly, Mill Creek Saucer. First saucer at Mill Creek for me, which was really fun. And it's hard to believe that after 4 years, I haven't been to every single school saucer, but it is true since we focus on our liaison schools. But it was really great to meet some of the teachers there and learn a little bit about how they do it at their schools. So it's been full, and it's a reminder that saucer season is busy and bond and levy season is busy, but I just appreciate all the contacts with our community and our parents through this work that we do, and it's been a lot of fun. Okay, I'm done. Let's move on. That takes us to section 9.0, and tonight there are no items planned for the superintendent's report for this agenda. So we will move to strategic progress monitoring, section 10.0. And tonight we have the pleasure of learning more about the next generation science standards, readiness, and I believe we have Dana Riley Black
Yes.
and Miss Cartwright.
Thank you. You can see why my star check was so important that I mentioned it. I'll do an introduction and then I'm going to hand it off to Andrea. But in addition to Andrea Cartwright, who is our Director for Science and Engineering, we also have Shannon Lacey here, who is our facilitator for secondary science and engineering. Our elementary science and engineering facilitator, Allie Greenberg, is actually in a session right now and wasn't able to step out because she's working with teachers. But I wanted to remind you that last year, almost to the day, we had a similar presentation in which we provided you with a deep dive into the next generation science standards. And with that, we helped unpack the newness and the complexity of these standards. This year, today, it's our plan to highlight our progress to date and our plans for the continued transition to full implementation of the next generation science standards, which will prepare our students for college, career, and life readiness. These are similar to the Common Core in that they're rigorous and they work towards college and career readiness. But what's unique about these standards as compared to the Common Core is they were developed with input from educators, from scientists and engineers, educational researchers in the community. I remember this because I was at the ISB when these standards were being created and then reviewed. And I remember at that time thinking, wow, these are ambitious standards. And it is going to take some significant and progressive coordination to implement these standards in a school system. That said, now being here in Everett, I'm really pleased with the progress we've made. And as we move through this presentation, it's my hope that you will recognize Everett Public Schools has a strong plan and solid foundation for continued implementation of the standards. And with that, I'll hand it off to Andrea.
Good evening. So in this evening's session, focused on the Next Generation Science Standards, or the NGSS, I plan to provide a status update of the district's transitions to and implementation of the NGSS. These are aligned KPOs. The format of this evening's session will be the following. First, I will briefly review the NGSS. I will then review the implementation timelines presented at last year's NGSS readiness report and highlight the progress made to date. And with this in context, I will then provide an overview of the district's continued transition to the NGSS. As a reminder, the NGSS is comprised of 3 dimensions: the disciplinary core ideas, the science and engineering practices, and cross-cutting concepts. When we think about standards in science, we often only think about the content. The NGSS, similar to the Common Core, also include the practices of both scientists and engineers. In addition, there are themes that cross-cut all of the practices and core ideas. Disciplinary ideas are grouped into 4 domains: the life sciences, engineering and technology, the earth and space sciences, and the physical sciences, and have been identified as being foundational to science learning. These central ideas have been organized in a coherent scope and sequence and build from kindergarten through high school. Scientists and engineers both achieve their ends in similar fashions, and as a result share many of the same practices as they work. The science and engineering practices are included as part of the standard to support the cultivation of the scientific habits of mind, the engagement in scientific inquiry, and teach how to reason in science. The next series of slides are timelines. The first slide, which was presented during last year's NGSS readiness report, depicts the work that created readiness for the transition to NGSS. Starting in 2012, we began NGSS awareness training. Just prior to the state's adoption of the NGSS in 2013, we began proficiency scaling. And in late 2014, we developed a cadre of teachers to provide on-the-ground support in the transition to the NGSS. In addition to building overall capacity to transition to the standards, we started to address one of the biggest shifts in the teaching of science, that was the inclusion of engineering, by integrating materials and courses that included engineering. Bless you. This slide was presented last year to share the next steps plans for the transition to NGSS. As presented, a key milestone is the launch of the new science assessment, the Washington Comprehensive Assessment of Science, or the WCAS, which will take place in spring. We articulated that our goal was to build an NGSS transition team to work with us on the development of NGSS course maps, as well as inform the development of our district's NGSS implementation plan. Shortly, I will highlight the work that has been done relevant to these 2 transition steps. Last year, we also noted that once course maps have been developed, we hope to begin the vetting and adoption process for new NGSS-aligned curriculum. This is an updated and expanded version of the previous slide. You will notice that this spring we will engage in a 9th grade science and engineering curriculum vetting and adoption process. A recommendation to you for new 9th grade NGSS-aligned instructional materials will take place as a first reading in late May with a second reading in June. Next year, we will establish a vetting and adoption process for both grade 10 science and engineering and K-5 instructional materials. In 2019-20, we will do the same for grade 11 and middle school instructional materials. This image is a snapshot of a document provided in the board docs. Since the last NGSS readiness report a year ago, an NGSS implementation plan was created that summarizes the awareness and transition work done at each grade band and the work that will follow to continue transition to implementation with full alignment of instructional resources. The next several slides will highlight the key pieces of this implementation plan. The science and engineering team is providing direct support for teachers and principals throughout the district. The team has presented at principal level meetings, sharing the NGSS implementation plan and the grade band specific work related to NGSS for the year. Teachers have access to monthly professional development opportunities focused on science and engineering practices. During these sessions, teachers learn high-leverage strategies to support the growth of student development and use of these practices. In addition to level meetings and professional development, face-to-face meetings with principals, science departments, and grade-level teams has occurred at all levels to support the understanding of the NGSS transition steps and overall support with the standards. We will continue to provide professional development for the remainder of the year and support staff specifically with their school improvement plans related to science, their understanding of the Washington Comprehensive Assessment of Science and the state-released resources for that assessment, like the training tests, and continue with NGSS Science and Engineering Practices Professional Development. Through the next few slides, I will highlight the efforts of NGSS transition related to each grade band despite not having NGSS adopted curriculum by way of utilizing our current science materials. At elementary school, you will hear about transition guides and alignment to reach for reading. For middle school, you'll hear about transition guides and defined STEM. And at the high school level, the first step towards the adoption of new instructional materials. At the elementary school level, STEM science leaders are working on creating NGSS transition guides for each science and engineering unit we implement. These guides will serve as a tool to assist teachers in understanding how their current science kit aligns with the NGSS, specifically related to the disciplinary core ideas. In addition, however, information regarding what students are doing and what teachers are doing related to the practices and cross-cutting concepts will help shift instruction and develop students' skill in these dimensions. Finally, whenever appropriate, alignment for reach for reading will be identified. This quote was shared by a 5th grade elementary teacher at View Ridge. On the alignment between ecosystem science kits and reach for reading units, she stated, "The idea of networks and systems in nature was important for both units. It was very fun to have the students apply what they learned in science to our literacy work. It will easily work the opposite for those schools that teach the ecosystems unit in the spring. We used that unit for an information writing project, and students were able to use the vocabulary they learned in the science kit work as well as their literacy unit vocabulary." STEM science leaders are also developing WOGCAS-aligned assessments. Teams of teachers meet and learn about how to create 2- and 3-dimensional assessment items and learn about the variety of item types that students will experience on the state science assessment. Teacher teams then write kit and unit-specific NGSS WOGCAS-aligned assessments. Currently, there is at least one aligned assessment per grade level. Additional assessments are under development as the teams continue to meet throughout the year. At the middle school level, teachers are utilizing the Define STEM website to implement performance tasks related to their current science units. The following video explains how Define STEM is structured and how it supports NGSS-aligned teaching and learning.
Let's take a look at how one defined STEM performance task addresses 3-dimensional science learning. In this 8th grade task, Aquarium Designer, students are introduced to the topic by watching a career video on how Infinity Aquarium Designs design and install aquariums. Through the use of guiding questions, students begin to apply scientific practices. As students learn about aquarium designers, they learn that regardless of the shape and volume of the aquarium, they need to provide a stable ecosystem for the organisms. Through the GRASP model, students are provided with a challenge of designing an innovative aquatic habitat. They take on the role of an aquarium designer applying for a job. They must persuade the interior design firm that they are the best person for the job. As students begin potential design solutions to meet this challenge, they will create a variety of products that include a design proposal and a photo story. In order to do this, students will apply disciplinary core ideas related to ecosystems and engineering, as well as the cross-cutting concepts of stability and change. The product rubrics provided align with these disciplinary core ideas. The students will need to use a number of the science and engineering practices as they work through the task and product development. Students will need to conduct research related to the task as well as applying their knowledge of the 3 dimensions. Practices addressed through this process include asking questions for science, defining problems for engineering, planning and carrying out investigations, constructing explanations for science, designing solutions for engineering, engaging in argument from evidence, and obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information. Thank you for taking the time to see how a defined STEM performance task can meet the demands of the new three-dimensional science initiative.
In the spring of 2017, we piloted the performance task platform with North and Gateway Middle School. This year, all 5 middle schools are implementing defined STEM performance tasks in at least one unit at each grade level. These images depict the work taking place in 8th grade science. With this performance task, 8th grade students work as manufacturing engineers during the light science unit and create sunglasses for extreme sports. Students first watch a career video on how the Gyro Company, which originally focused on mountain biking helmets or biking helmets, extended their work to sunglasses for bikers. Students were tasked with designing sunglasses for an extreme sport that are functional, are aesthetically pleasing, and provide safety from harmful UV rays. To do this work, students learned about the electromagnetic spectrum, solar energy and waves, reflection, refraction, and the absorption of light. They researched extreme sports and what athletes needed to be able to see to be safe when engaged in their sport. Finally, they created 2D prototypes of their glasses and a presentation. The examples provided on the slide are just a few of the products created by students during this task. You will see that a team created glasses for skydivers, called the Skoggles. Another team created sunglasses for football players. Snowboarding and ski goggles were improved with science learned, and the Rikuchiku glasses in the upper right-hand corner were designed for mountain bikers. In Washington State, each school district is tasked to determine how the NGSS are applied across each grade band. It is recommended that districts develop course maps for this process and purpose. In spring, we convened a K-12 team, our K-12 NGSS design team, to study local and national course maps and then drafted possible course maps for Everett Public Schools. In the fall, we convened a high school portion of the design team to identify a high school science and engineering course map that will guide the identification of new courses and the adoption of new materials. To assist with the identification of new courses, the team learned about all of the criteria that need to be applied to high school courses to ensure that they afford students the opportunity to pursue any post-secondary credential. The criteria identified were the 24-credit policy, the college admissions requirements, CTE alignment, and NGSS-aligned instruction and curriculum features. The team also wanted to create the ability for students to thread between a core pathway of science and engineering courses and an advanced pathway. Finally, the team wanted to create the potential for student choice and propose courses that aligned with the future career pathways at each high school. Once we understood all of the criteria, we engaged in analysis of the course maps, both created and reviewed to date. Based on the analysis data, models were revised, and then a final screening was applied to determine Everett Public Schools NGSS-aligned high school courses. The high school NGSS design team has identified the following courses with working titles: Environmental Biology, Chemistry in Earth, Biological, and Material Systems, and Earth and Space. These courses meet all of the review criteria, are student-centered, and align with regional phenomena and application opportunities, as well as the future career pathway programs. The NGSS design team is proposing the following pathway for these NGSS courses. Upon graduation from middle school, 8th grade science or 8th grade coordinated science, incoming 9th graders will choose between environmental biology or AP environmental science starting next year. Our advanced placement courses are well aligned to the NGSS and therefore provide for an advanced course pathway. This cohort of students will then take the NGSS chemistry course or an equivalent advanced pathway course if appropriate. As 11th graders, they will take Earth and Space. Please note that the high school credit-bearing option in middle school will continue to be coordinated science for the time being, as the middle school course maps are under construction and not yet finalized. Additionally, both 8th grade science and 8th grade coordinated science concepts and developed skills lay the foundation for the coursework in both of the 9th grade science options. The following image depicts our planned transition to the NGSS-aligned instructional materials to support these new courses. The orange represents the vetting and adoption process, and the blue represents year one implementation of these instructional resources and the course. As you can see, and as previously stated, we will begin the vetting and adoption process for the environmental biology this spring with year one implementation next year. During the year one implementation of this environmental biology course, we will engage in the adoption process for the NGSS chemistry course. Finally, during the year one implementation of that NGSS chemistry course, we will engage in the adoption process for the Earth and Space course. Year one implementation will occur in 2020-21. The Washington Comprehensive Assessment of Science is currently slated to become a graduation requirement in the spring of 2021. This timeline allows for our incoming ninth graders to engage in NGSS-aligned science courses with standards-aligned instructional materials in preparation for this requirement. As you recall, two of the criteria the design team applied to their course map development was student choice and the alignment to future career pathways. In their current conception and after careful review of the standards bundled into each of the courses, the team has identified that the order in which the students take these courses does not matter. In other words, learning standards in one course do not need to precede another. Once we have instructional materials that support each of these courses, the hope is to provide flexibility regarding the order in which students take these courses. For example, if a student knows that they want to enter into the Medical and Health Careers Pathway program in their junior year, which will most likely be filled with life science focused courses, then that student may choose to take Earth and Space and the NGSS chemistry course focused on Earth, biological, and material systems in their 9th and 10th grade year. Their junior year in the Career Pathway program will most likely contain a life science focused course, which may serve as an equivalency to the environmental biology course. As we get further into the planning for the Career Pathway programs, we will look to identify equivalencies between the pathway courses and the science and engineering courses and create tools to help students and parents understand student options and opportunities. In conclusion, Everett Public Schools has a comprehensive plan to implement the next generation science standards. All grade levels in the district are progressing in the transition to NGSS. The STEM team is providing ongoing support for teachers and principals. I look forward to continuing to communicate our transition to these standards as we prepare to implement new NGSS-aligned courses and propose to you NGSS-aligned curriculum to adopt. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great overview of science. Very exciting. Directors, do you have questions for any of the team members?
I do, but I'm not sure how to ask this. And I know this has been spelled out in previous presentations, so if I'm to summarize, in 2012, we started awareness training. In 2018-19, we'll start an adoption process for the graduation requirement in 2021, correct?
Correct.
I'm struggling to think of what was a 9-year buildup for any other curriculum that we have adopted within the district. It just seems rather protracted or rather long.
It does seem rather long.
Yeah.
And the limiting factor actually isn't internal to the school district, rather it's external in that materials haven't been created to adopt.
Okay.
Oh, interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, and so my follow-up question to that was really, so what has been the reception? For example, on slide 10, it talks about the support for teachers and principals. What has been the reception of the professional development around this, knowing that it's such a long time frame?
What has been the reception, I think, is twofold, if I can answer it like this. On one hand, our teachers and our administrators have been very engaged with this work. On the other hand, because of the long buildup, I don't know that they're fully aware that they have readiness. And so one of our big tasks right now, because it's become ubiquitous almost, one of our big tasks is reminding everybody that we do have readiness. we have been practicing this and we're ready for the transition.
And thank you very much, a very, very definitive and very well thought out plan, and I really appreciate it, and it's exciting, it truly is. My question is, when we start looking at the...
Emma, you use your mic a little more.
When we start looking at the textbooks for it, I mean, if the plan hasn't, the curriculum really hasn't been fully developed, when will we be responsible for purchasing the textbooks necessary for these courses in order to provide our teachers with professional development before the students actually start seeing these in the classroom? I mean, we're talking about 1819 for environmental biology, and I don't know, have we purchased the textbooks yet?
Not yet.
If we have not, when are we going to provide our teachers with that type of professional development prior to the adoption? And then will we have adequate time to have the textbooks or any digital work or any prep work before the students actually see it in September? Because that's when it's talking about, September, right? Yeah.
Yep, so we are about to convene a ninth grade science and engineering adoption team that will begin in February. And then we will come to you with a first reading in late May to recommend material to support that ninth grade science and engineering course. So the science and engineering team has been, how do you call it? We've been scouring the marketplace for years to understand when it would make the most sense to propose instructional materials, and we've now hit that moment in time. And so the ninth grade adoption team will vet materials throughout February to May, and we will come to you to propose and recommend the adoption in late spring.
Are you asking whether or not we should off for a year's?
My concern is, I'll piggyback on what Director Wenta tried to bring forward, is what's the feeling from the current staff as to the ability to accomplish this in such a short period of time?
I can tell you that the high school staff is ready for the change. It's to your point, been this notion of when are we taking that last final jump into full alignment has been swirling for a while. And so at the high school level, with all of the professional development that's taken place, and with the removal of the biology end of course and the onset of the Washington Comprehensive Assessment of Science, those teachers are asking and are ready for NGSS aligned courses and are very much looking forward to this adoption process to begin new coursework next year.
I would also just add that this is not unlike, this rollout is not unlike some of the other large-scale adoptions that we've just previously gone through, like K-5 ELA adoption. So selection, summer training, budgeting for year one implementation training, year two implementation training as well.
Well, but see, we're planning on having the classes start in September of this year, and I recall several parents saying, well, my child doesn't have a textbook for that class. And my concern is, I would hope we would ensure that we have all curriculum materials well in advance of when the class would start.
That's part of the timeline, exactly. We would.
And so in continuing that, in middle school then, are we continuing to use the existing materials in the science classes and then sort of weaving in activities and instruction around the new standards? Or how is that playing out in light of no adoption there?
Right, so the defined STEM, the integration of the defined STEM was intentional to heighten that three-dimensional teaching and learning experience. In addition to that, the grade level teams have met over the course of years to design engineering design projects to implement relevant to their course. So for example, in 7th grade in the Earth and Space, there's an engineering design project focused on a Mars rover that students engage in. So we have been enhancing the current material in alignment to the standards for continued use.
When's the last time there were new science standards? How long has it been? You know?
1996.
96.
Yeah,
So about,
the national standards, the last round of national standards were published by the National Research Council in 1996. And those were the big breakthrough at that point in time, right? And now we have these new standards. We'll note that the middle school adoption process is meant to start next year. So
okay.
it's,
So it won't be
no, yeah,
too
it's,
far behind.
none of this is too far behind. We're moving it forward.
And so just to kind of summarize for myself, thinking out loud, you're using the implementation of the new standards to realign essentially the science pathways in our district.
Yes. That's right.
And swapping out classes, as it were, at the high school level?
Swapping out and creating equivalencies as well.
Okay. And then, so teachers will be going from sort of one science class and transitioning to teaching a different one.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
We were intentional to have the course redesign happen before the purchase of materials. So we wanted to make sure that the market for those materials were standards aligned rather than the other way around.
And are these standards national, or is it like Common Core where districts get to choose from a variety of standards? Or states, states adopt.
The next generation science standards are developed nationally, and states can choose to adopt them.
Like
if they'd
Common
like to.
Core? Similar?
There currently are 24 states in the nation who have adopted the next gen science standards.
Okay. Any additional questions? Dhruva?
Yeah, I have a quick question. So you mentioned the new NGSS high school science courses like environmental biology and the chemistry course. So I was wondering, are those supposed to replace the existing biology and chemistry courses that we have, or are they two separate kind of spheres?
No, those will be replacing.
And if we can note, we're still in the process of messaging this out to all of the principals and guidance counselors, so students don't, we're waiting to post this on our website, okay?
Yeah.
So you're saying that when we look at these classes here, if a student is not in an AP chemistry class, they probably are taking a class that says chemistry and earth life and material systems. They're not taking chemistry any longer.
Correct.
Okay.
Just because the way that our new standards are set up is they are, the disciplinary core ideas are integrated. They're not separate from each other.
I gotcha. And is it possible for kids in, say, in one of those classes, the core pathways, to switch over to advanced placement
Absolutely.
if they so choose?
Yes, absolutely. And that we were really intentional about creating the ability to thread between the two pathways or jump, if you will, and not get locked into one or the other.
And if they so choose, if we're fortunate to have the different signature programs available to our students, they can also thread those courses within. So they could take them at any time. Like the 10th grade chemistry class does not have to be taken at 10th grade. It could be taken at 11th grade and vice versa, the earth and science.
Correct. That's what we've envisioned and what we're planning to accommodate.
After the breakthrough. Or
Correct.
The actual initiation.
Yes.
Good. Very good.
I think in your spare time, you should work with the AP folks to get them to redesign their courses as well. Just because I'm looking at, it's like AP chemistry or chemistry and earth life and material systems. That just sounds so much more interesting. So I wonder if you'll actually see that. I bet the College Board is sort of starting to hopefully consider some of that. Okay, any further questions, or are we?
I just had a comment, and perhaps Dr. Cohn, you can fill me in. I'm assuming that when these were adopted, obviously this predates my time on the board. It was with the understanding from the board that there was a long game, and in this case, the curriculum adoptions wouldn't be coming for 6-7 years. Is that correct?
The state adopted them in 2012.
Okay. And so by the state adopting them, we automatically,
2013, sorry.
we automatically signed on. Okay.
But
What I'm,
it's fair to say that when this describes that curriculum, it's our obligation.
yeah.
They're asking to speak up. They can't hear me.
They're asking you to speak up.
And what I'm struggling with is just the length of the adoption process. And I'm assuming that different adoptions, there's not a one-size-fits-all.
Are you struggling with the adoption process, or are you struggling with the standards development and implementation process? Because I think our adoption process, I don't think is
Pretty clean.
lengthier than, yeah. I think what you're observing is what it takes to have a set of standards developed nationally, and then go through processes with states to have them selected, and then have the materials redeveloped so that they align to those standards. I mean, so as I recall, we purchased I think my first year was when we finished the second year of the vetting, piloting process, and adopted what we at that time thought would be Common Core aligned ELA materials for elementary. And we've just done a second go-around, $2.3 million, on far better aligned ELA materials. So I think there's, to some degree, a significant horizon when you're dealing with a significant set of standards that people are trying to get ahead of in some cases, or catching up with in other cases. So I think it's fair to say that these things take a long time across the course, or across the breadth of the country. And I think to some degree the fact that they've taken a long time and there have been so many people involved in them, at least I hope this is the case, and I think we're observing this, is that they're far more rigorous, vetted, and reliable, and hopefully then stable standards over time, so that we don't have to keep buying new materials as political entities keep changing standards and then changing the assessments. Yeah. So I think it's fair to say that the timeline for these standards is longer.
Thank you.
Or purchasing prematurely. That was well said.
Well,
I just think purchasing prematurely is something that we were trying to avoid in the timeline. And it is unusual in the sense that typically adoptions are year zero of vetting, year one of implementation. You all are well versed in that conventional process. This is unconventional in the sense that the materials simply aren't on the market, and we don't want to have the tail wagging the dog in that sense, and work on the course redesign and understanding the standards before jumping into the purchase.
Purchase the material.
Thank you.
Do we have any kind of idea if we have adequate funding for whatever the curriculum will be that we so choose? I mean, I have no idea how much we should have or should set aside based on this.
We've amply planned for that particular, knowing that there are variables and unknowns. You saw the 7-year forecast, so these folks have done an outstanding job forecasting and being accurate in their forecasting in the past, and we anticipate that same thing here. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. No further comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great
This is exciting.
information. Very interesting. Okay, I'm going to speak very quickly because Director Wenta has challenged me to an hour board meeting. Let's see, that takes us to section 11.0, information discussion, and there is no information or discussion planned for this evening's agenda. Section 12.0, unfinished business. There is no unfinished business tonight. Section 13.0, new business. There is no new business tonight. Section 14.0, upcoming agenda items. I do believe we have some of those. Dr. Cohn, may you please tell us our upcoming agenda items?
Yes, item 14.1 is a special meeting. It is tomorrow morning, actually, it's the State of Everett Address. 3 or more of you requested to be registered to attend that. So we published the meeting. Item 14.2 is a special meeting on January 28th. It is the WASDA, WASA, WASBO Legislative Conference. We've done a tremendous amount of work preparing for that. We'll be leaving this site at 9 a.m. on Sunday morning and returning sometime around 5 or so p.m. based on the traffic coming back from Olympia. That agenda will be published very shortly. Item 14.3 is your regular meeting on February 6th. The strategic progress monitoring item is a heavy-duty item. It's the strategic plan mid-year progress report. We plan to bring a couple of policies to you for first reading, and then there are several general operating business items, including starting the student representative selection process by identifying a board rep for that selection committee. That concludes your upcoming agenda items, and there are no executive or closed session items planned for this evening. Is there anything else you'd like to do tonight?
Anybody? With that, we are on section 16.0, adjournment. That concludes the business scheduled to come before the Everett Public Schools Board of Directors this evening. This meeting is adjourned.